One of the things that we want to do is just kind of open up discussion. So if you kind of don't get the framework, if it doesn't work for you, or if you're not familiar with it, don't let that stop you from speaking. It's really just a way for us to go through the co-op in a way of saying, hey, here's a couple of things we want to pay attention to: financial health, reaching full potential, member participation, strategizing around challenges. And please interrupt me or Ethan, respectfully, as they go through the presentation so we can get all the information we can out on the table. The framework is really cool, and again, it's just a framework, so we don't expect you to know a lot about this or anything, but it's just going to be a way for us to walk through some of how Pedal People has started and has been over the last, 20 years now. And we're going to basically reinforce why cooperatives are different. So having a mission that's not just getting money, putting people over profit, having cooperative principles and values and processes wherever possible. And some of our cooperatives are slowly growing, I think, like this one. We'll find out. Some aren't, some have grown fast, some have not grown. So this is something where maybe we can pull out themes that we don't know about, that we haven't identified yet. So Ethan's just going to present on what it is. We'll talk about what phase we think they're in. Ethan's going to talk about that. We'll have different ways of measuring how successful Pedal People is according to some regular metrics like financial health, but also ones that are specific to your co-op. And then discuss ways on how to improve, and we'll follow up. Before Ethan starts, are there any ideas or thoughts or concerns that people have? All right. Well, Ethan, I'm going to make you a presenter, and I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so you should be able to share your slideshow now, but maybe you can just kind of introduce yourself and say what you're doing. And I'd just like to say thank you to Ethan and everyone at Pedal People for being a part of this and for creating this great slideshow. GoToMeeting is the, oh, okay, you got it, okay.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm just different than Zoom. I just need to figure out where the controls are.
Okay.
Slideshow. Yeah, can you, okay, great.
Perfect.
Can you see that?
Sure can.
All right, awesome, great. So yeah, I'm Ethan Tupelo. I've been with Pedal People for 6 years, 7 years, something like that, a while now. I've also, I got involved with Pedal People as a grad student at UMass and ended up writing my dissertation primarily centered around Pedal People. So a lot of the material I'm going to present today is already like semi-gathered, and I've of course like formatted it very differently for this assessment. But yeah, great. So let's see here. How do I advance with it? Okay, great. So Adam basically just explained this, so I won't go into that much detail about this, but this is, a bit more of a zoomed in view of the assessment thing that he was talking about. So I think what I'm going to do, like, I'll spend like the first few bits talking about like these first few phases of like Pedal People sort of forming and challenges that we're facing. A lot of this will probably be in our current status. I think we're still solidly in this like phase 3 stage. Where exactly, I'm not sure. And then maybe at the end, I'll just kind of speculate what could be phase 4 or 5 that are potentially on the horizon. And of course, hopefully other Pedal People here will have stuff to contribute and hopefully even disagree with me in some of my assessments. So I'll start off by saying, like, pedal people, like, everyone knows us as like the bike-based waste hauler, but we pedal people never actually set out to primarily haul waste. And I just wanted to introduce that because that's kind of important to, you know, be able to think about and assess, like, are we meeting our goals? I'll get into our mission statement later, but it's just interesting to think about that we still describe ourselves primarily as a human-based hauling service, not necessarily tied to hauling trash, recycling, and compost. So in the early days, there were actually lots of stuff that Pedal People was doing. Like when talking to customers, they were talking about, like, oh yeah, they helped to bring my kids to school for a while, or we used to do like farm share deliveries and things like that. But all of these things have just been a relatively minor part in terms of like overall income and work of what Pedal People has done. Alex and Ruthie, the way they tell this story, they intentionally started in the winter because they wanted to make sure they could actually do the work in the winter, because no one's going to sign up for a trash service that you can only use half of the year. It was difficult at the start. They didn't plow the bike path. On the other hand, like for the first 6 months, they only had like 10 customers, so it was extremely part-time. So they had, you know, different jobs at the time, and, you know, needed to put in that effort to like get things off the ground. The initial spread of Pedal People, both in terms of customers and people joining the collective, was very slow and word of mouth. It was just kind of like, from what I've heard, like, you know, oh, you heard people saw you, or out riding and asked about a job, or like you just had your extended friends network. And it was only a few years in that they had like a formal hiring round. Other early stuff, I know Ben Winter has mentioned, who's another longtime pedal person, has mentioned a few times to me, just like they didn't know what we were doing with the trailers at the beginning. Like the tires on the trailer, like say like inflate to 100 PSI or something, and they were doing that and it kept blowing out, and they had to figure out like, nope, can't do that. And then other stuff like balancing the trailers, how to load it. You see kind of a contrast here with the photos on the top where Ruthie is using and others are using like the shorter trailers. Maybe it's hard to see for a non-pedal person, but these are only like 4 bins long, and these ones on the bottom are like 6 bins long. And nowadays we almost entirely use the longer trailers just because you can hold more. They're, you know, in some ways, you know, well, in lots of ways, from most of our perspective, they're better. But like in the early days, it's kind of like, yeah, we'll just buy whatever and see how that works. I think this was just a fun page of like, here's some of the weird stuff that I have hauled. So people can call us to haul anything away. So this is stuff from our sweep routes. It's actually a lot easier to throw a mattress on a trailer than it is to throw it on a car. So consider that. So if you're feeling bad for us, if you're gonna hire something, it's actually not as hard as it looks. And there must be some kind of like standard gauge or something like that for materials in general, because I keep picking stuff up and finding it like fits on the trailer perfectly. Like this grill is one of my favorite photos. It just like all these things I keep picking up. It's like, oh, it fits just fine. So one of the major things that I think really helped instigate or maybe force Pedal People to formalize a lot of its structures was getting the downtown trash contract with the city. If you are in downtown Northampton, especially when there aren't that many cars, and look around, it's actually kind of absurd how many trash cans there are downtown. But it's really advantageous to pick these up with a bike. You know, all of the like starts and stops are very easy to do with a bike compared to a truck. And so when the city was looking for someone else to take over that, they were actually trying to get Pedal People to take on the contract. And the way Ruthie tells the story is that, well, we couldn't really get our act together quickly enough because we were still relatively small, would have had to hire a bunch of people. But one of the major problems was having the city required all contractors to get insurance. which pedal people didn't have, and was a bit of a struggle to find someone to actually provide pedal people insurance. Like plenty of people willing to insure truck-based haulers, but like I guess they thought we were like more dangerous or something like that, is like the way Ruthie usually talks about it. But eventually we found someone, and then we also around that same time formally incorporated as an organization. And we're, as I think Adam has mentioned a few times, we're one of the ones that are incorporated under that bit of Massachusetts law. Can I remember this offhand? 157 and then some letter, something like that. I'm probably close. But it's the thing that's that allows you to organize as a democratic workspace that basically allows you to distribute profits based on labor contribution instead of capital investments, I think. How did I do, Adam?
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Awesome, thanks. Cool. So I think it's really this like it needing to interface with other like formal entities that in some ways force pedal people to start doing this, where before lots of things were very informal. Just some statistics that we can look at to think about comparing pedal people with this general assessment here. This graph at the top is a combined graph that shows both gross income and combined pickups, which you see tracks very close to each other, which makes sense if we're charging, relatively consistent amounts or something like that over time. We just last year cracked $500,000 for the first time, so that was a major achievement. And you can see by these like standard measures, like pedal people has grown every year. And there was some talk, I remember when I first joined in 2006 and 7, it's like, oh, it looks kind of like we're kind of like plateauing or narrowing off. But then you looking at this graph, oh, we started accelerating again. And the only reason actually this hadn't spiked even more in 2020 or 2021 was that we had customer freezes, that we were just like, too many people wanted our services even before COVID, but then especially during COVID, that we were like, wait a minute, we need to like stop taking on new customers till we get a handle on our current ones, which I've described as like, that's a pretty good problem to have. Let's see here. So this is another thing from that the paper that Adam didn't show, this graph on the bottom. And this, I sort of like this. This is a different way to think about that like tinkering phase of like, what is going on exactly up here is like not necessarily like a huge drop off, but like you notice something is, potentially going wrong or could go wrong. And then what do you do to adjust for that? So I think the things I'm going to describe now are more like in these phase 3 tinkerings, although I think for most of these, like they probably happened before we had this an actual like downturn of any kind. One of them was yard care. This is one of the things that we've managed to fairly sustainably expand into beyond just hauling. And the major tinkering that we did with this is when I started, this was done entirely with human-powered tools, like this photo on the top. And it really became unsustainable. Like these hand-push mowers, they're fine if you can keep up with a yard, but if you fall behind it all and if the tools aren't sharp enough, they become really difficult. So after a few years of this, we had a debate of like, well, we can't keep doing it this way. Do we make a compromise and do we use electric-based mowers for this? And it was basically a decision, do we do this or do we basically end the yard care part of our business? And we decided, after a lot of debates and discussion, decided, oh, we're going to at least trial this out and see how it goes. And we've ended up making that permanent, that like this is one of those things that it just makes more sense to use electric for. And I think if we decided to end it at this point, it wouldn't have necessarily been a bad thing in the sense that like almost everyone who was in the yard care part of the business was already fairly integrated within the hauling stuff. So like, it's not like their jobs would have disappeared. They would have like become part of like the regular trash and recycling, hauling, and there just would have been a shift. Another major thing throughout this whole time is, of course, because there's been more work, the size of the collective has grown. You can sort of see in these photos, like these group photos, like becoming more and more people. Actually, the size of the collective now is even larger than this latest photo I could find. We're now up to 25 people, which is, I think 25, something around there at least. So that's affected us in lots of different ways. Like when I started just a few years ago, hiring was still a relatively rare thing. Maybe we would have a hiring round once a year. Now hiring is basically done almost ongoing and continuously, just because of the rate that the business is going and people deciding to leave for one reason or another. We usually always need to replace a few people a year. So that's a major change. Another major thing is that we still make decisions by consensus, and that our decision-making structure it hasn't abandoned consensus at all, but like it's really altered in lots of ways based on the size and the collective. And I'll go into more detail about that in a second. This is a slide I've made for a different presentation, but this is kind of like what Adam was getting at earlier about like how like a typical business makes decisions versus how pedal people makes decisions. And I think like the main thing to look at here is the decision-making basis. Typical businesses primarily made based on profit. For pedal people, they're primarily based on values, and that's even when we're talking about money, the question is usually always still a matter of values, basically. Like we're still talking about it in that sense. Just a few other lines to highlight here. The one on compensation. In typical waste hauling businesses, we see extreme inequality. The average CEO to worker pay of one of the major waste hauling companies is 183 to 1, which that's actually good in quotation marks based on how like most corporations are in the US, which gives you an idea of how bad inequality has gotten in this country. And at pedal people, the pay compensation scale, like at the extreme, it's more like 1.5 to 1. And it's really always based on like the type of work that someone is doing. And then of course, other things also like who we associate with, like, it's usually not advocating our economic interests. We're involved with groups like VAWC to advocate our shared values as worker owners. So I mentioned decision-making structure. So one of the major changes that we started making as the collective was growing, and this started like around 2015-ish, but it's gone through a lot of phases, was really formalizing our committee structure. On the left here, you see a list of some of the committees that we have, like a specific one for finance, another one for technology, things like that. And for each of these committees, we've sort of decided by consensus how much decision-making authority we're delegating to these standing committees. So for example, the one on the bit on the right here is the decision-making powers for the finance committee. And so they have, for anything that's considered a minor decision, they can basically just make that decision. So we were saying like anything that has to do with like routine billing or deposits, like don't bother the collective with that. You're empowered to deal with that on your own. And what this does is it allows us to save the collective meeting time, the consensus meeting time that we need the full group, that we use the full group on, like for stuff that we actually need like full group input on. And we try to not to be bothered as much with like these little routine things. And then there are like different levels of decision making also. Like there are some things where like the finance committee is still expected to like make the decision, but it's expected that they're going to at least check in with the collective about this. Like, hey, we're thinking about like, changing the way our equipment loan program works. Please give input on this proposal, but it's still like up to them to make that decision. And there are some things where they're still expected to take the lead on, but they would actually still need consensus on, like changing the pay structure, for example. So again, it's just kind of like trying to push things out of meetings and empower like standing committees to deal with those things. We've also gone through a few different revisions to our pay system. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the ones I like highlighting is our region system. This was, I forget when exactly this was formalized, maybe like 2012 or 2013, where we realized there was a problem so people are, very roughly, people are compensated based on the number and types of pickups that they do. But that became kind of unequal if someone had like lots of pickups that were close to a transfer station, which on this map is represented by the brown dots. There's like one kind of in the middle and there's one kind of towards the bottom of the screen. And so like those people could do like a lot of work relatively easily. And those people who are going from farther out areas had to do a lot more work to earn the same amount of money. So we came up with a system of dividing the town up into regions, and each of these regions, I'm not sure if you can make out the like tiny numbers within the regions, but each of the regions are adjusted by a certain percentage for the pay from those regions. So like if you're close to a transfer station, the pay adjustment may be like minus 20%, but the idea is that you can do a lot more work a lot more easily there. Where if you're hauling from like over near where the bridge is to go over to Hadley, the pay bump is about like 25%, just because it takes you 20 minutes or something to get to the transfer station. So it's a way to kind of like equalize the pay with the work that we're doing. And because of this and lots of other factors, if you look just by the dollar per hour, pedal people average pay has been much higher than the average pay for the refuse and recycling materials collectors in the Springfield statistical area. So we're 25, I think we're closer to 26 an hour now. And as of a few years ago, it was still only around $18 an hour for people driving around in trucks.
Ethan, I wonder if I can ask you a question on that last slide.
Yeah. Sure.
Do you have people, thank you. Do you have people who have different pickups on one route in a bunch of these different colors? Or am I just going to one of those sections usually per route and they're all like that?
Yeah, so it's different. So we actually subdivide it even more. So on a particular route, they're divided into different runs. So like, which is basically like filling up one trailer is considered a run. So routes may have 4 runs, for example. So for filling up one trailer, that's definitely supposed to be within one of these colored regions. Like you shouldn't have to go around to like different parts of town just to fill up a trailer once. Mm-hmm. But on a route, like some of them are all concentrated in one region. Like the one I do on Tuesday is almost entirely in the State Street area. They're not all like that. Like some of them will like do 1 or 2 runs from one area and we'll do 1 or 2 runs from a different area. We also like coordinate this where different regions are done on different days. So we usually have a bunch of people working in a region on a specific day of the week, which helps if like, someone, has a flat tire and needs help at the last minute. It's easier to do that if like someone's already there in that area and can maybe grab a few customers.
Great, thanks, Ethan.
Yeah. All right, so yeah, I mentioned the mission statement at the beginning. So here I have a kind of side-by-side of our our early mission statement versus the one that was revised in 2014, I believe. I may be off by like a year on that. And the later one on the right is roughly the one that we're still using now with one minor wording, but very significant change, which I'll talk about in a second. But I just wanted to contrast these. I've sort of highlighted a few bits of this, where the original one, in my interpretation of this, like it was in many ways very critiquing of technology. It was about like choosing a more sustainable lifestyle. There's this phrase about like trying to live in a fair, noble way, exploiting no one. And there's this value of like a low income living as a counter to the consume spend lifestyle of America today, and saying like that's a value that we have as workers. And so I wasn't here for the debates around this, but like, you know, there were lots of discussions about like, is this actually like honest? Should we actually require this of people? What does that mean for us as an organization to like, you know, sort of like say as our mission, and you're joining this, we're like into low income, like that. In some ways that's kind of weird as a worker cooperative to kind of say that. So the revised one, I think, like keeps a lot of like the spirit of the like social justice aspects of that. It's still very much committed to like using human power, like it starts off the same, but it has a more general like wanting to challenge systems of oppression and inequality, and more like a more aspirational working towards a more just society. And I also want to introduce this just because like I think still a lot of the not conflicts, but maybe like disagreements that we have around values are still maybe around this point in some way, especially when it comes to discussions around like, you know, should we raise our prices to increase worker pay? You know, oftentimes we people like saying things like, oh, well, I'm making enough for my needs or something like that. And then, you know, other people being like, well, you know, your needs aren't my needs, or, you know, things like that. So it's, and then, you know, there's potentially like an underlying, like, you know, how much consumption or something that do you need that I think is kind of like unresolved within the collective itself, even though like the mission statement itself has officially changed. The major change, which I'll introduce here, which we actually just passed a few months ago, which I've highlighted. This is the same thing again. This is the 2014 on the left, and this is our current purposes now on the right. The little insertion there is we're going to allow small scale electric power. And this is not just with yard care, which we've already kind of accepted already, but this is allowing electric assist bicycles for hauling, which is a major change for us. We've experimented with this for the last few years, just kind of to see how it would go. And I think lots of people have advocated this because just thinking about like, how can we make this job easier on our bodies, or more sustainable, or more accessible to more people? You know, are we kind of reaching the limits of the number of people who are physically able to do this job without electric assist? So you know, this is a major thing for us, and I think like it's kind of unresolved, like what exactly this is going to look like. We've kind of approved this as like a high level thing, but like the details are what we're going to need to work out over the next year in terms of like, does this mean like we're going to like buy bikes for people to use? Does this mean people are allowed to use it, but we're going to subsidize it? Does it just mean they're allowed to use it if they can afford it? Like there are lots of details to work out with this. And this was kind of contentious. You know, I mean, when we passed this, you know, of course it passed by consensus, but we did have, I forget how many, but at least a few like people who stood aside from the decision, basically saying like, well, I don't think it's needed, but like, I understand like, you know, for the collective, like this is, you know, an option at least we should open ourselves up to at this point. So this is just putting up the mission statement again, and looking at it next to a graph that I made that was kind of averaging our income sources over a 5-year period. And again, just, you know, kind of from where I started, emphasizing that like there's nothing in the mission statement about us hauling waste, right? You know, we were just setting out really to show like, hey, you know, you don't need, you know, expensive advanced machinery, often very polluting machinery, to be able to haul stuff around. Yet with all the stuff that we have tried over the years, still waste-related hauling stuff is the overwhelming majority of our income. You have slivers in there for yard care, which is a good chunk, and some other stuff for deliveries, but like, what is it, like 85, maybe 90% total is waste-related stuff, which maybe is more of a commentary on the society that we're living in more than pedal people, that like the things that people need hauled around the most is like getting rid of their trash. But I also bring that up just kind of like as a tension that also exists within pedal people, where that one of the common things people are saying in their exit interviews is like, yeah, this was a great job, and like, I'm not leaving with like negative feelings or anything like that. But like one of the most difficult things was just like dealing with and seeing all the waste that everyone was leaving out. So this is just, I think, showing those graphs again that I introduced a little bit before, and I think with this bottom one, with the examples that I gave, like again, I think that for most of these things, we haven't actually reached a point where if I put it on a graph, we were like actually like trending downwards. I think this was more, these are all examples of us like doing a good job of thinking about in advance and recognizing, hey, here's a potential problem on the horizon, and maybe making these tinkering adjustments before there is even like something that we would graph negatively on something like this, even abstractly. So for the last bit, maybe just to speculate on like things that could lead to these downturns, or things maybe that we're like dependent on that we know about and we've talked about. I think pedal people is in some ways like in this special situation in that like it receives a lot of support from the city itself, or maybe the region more broadly. As people in Bacano, like this region has a long history of cooperatives that extends back, well, depending on how you find cooperative, hundreds of years. We have a relatively liberal population that's wanting to, they're like, oh yeah, people could haul my stuff by bike. Like that sounds great. Where I could see other places are like, what are those crazy people doing? Well, they still say that here, but like then they're like, what a good idea. We've also have a city government that generally has been very encouraging of us. I mentioned the downtown trash contract, but even before that, when we were initially like trying to get permits to be able to haul waste, like of course there's nothing in Massachusetts law that addresses explicitly like hauling waste by bicycle. So it was really just a matter of, do you have someone who works at the DPW willing to like entertain you and like say like, yeah, we'll go along with this crazy experiment, without even knowing like what they're getting into with that. So, and I can totally see like a different city, deciding something differently and like not allowing a project like this to emerge. We're also, I think, largely supported by the city layout and the bike infrastructure. This map highlights, of course, our great bike paths, which we use often, but even without them, like the city has done a decent job of like putting in bike paths and stuff like that. And I also think I phrase this kind of as like what the city is doing, but we've also had a lot of effect on the city doing those things as our business has grown. Like I think it's probably fair to say we were one of the major instigators of getting the city to like plow the bike path, for example, in the winter. Like, no, people actually will use this with their bikes in the winter if you do this. And then also, I think we're somewhat dependent on our waste infrastructure systems that we're plugged into, which I'll say a bit more about.
It's all really great. I just want to do a time check for you. I don't know if there's a break point we can kind of stop and get some feedback, or if you were able to, I don't want you to rush, but I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I'll probably be done in like 5-ish minutes or something like that. Yeah, but if, I mean, I was expecting people to jump in if they had anything to say right away, but I'm also happy just to finish and we can always return to stuff. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going. So yeah, the waste infrastructures, like I mentioned, the transfer stations, we're very dependent on them. Like we need to bring the waste to these places. That has created some like unfortunate dynamics. We have lots of conflicts over the years with Valley Recycling, the privately owned one at the southern edge of town, where it was actually great going there when I first started. We got a discount, people seemed friendly, and now it's kind of like lots of people seem relatively hostile to us a lot of the time. We've had issues with overcharging, things like that. And even at Locust Street, the city-owned place, if they change their pay structure, or their cost structure, which they did to us just a few years ago, we basically have to either eat the costs or pass that on to the customers. And when they did this last time, we suddenly had to start paying them like an extra $20,000 to $30,000 a year. I forget the exact number. So it was significant. And it's like it's kind of like, well, what are we going to do in those situations? And we've had talks of like, can we form our own transfer station in some way? And there's a lot of regulations around that. There's a lot of costs. And again, like, do we want to actually be focused so much on waste in the first place? Yeah. And then this fits in with other stuff that's going on in the region. So like costs of disposal are going up. The Northampton landfill was closed about a decade ago, and other regional landfills have closed. If you saw in the news, the trash incinerators in Springfield and Pittsfield were shut down last year, which in some ways is great, that people don't have to live around that pollution anymore. But on the other hand, there's actually no disposal places at all in Western Mass anymore at all. Like everything is just shipped out of state at this point. So of course that just raises the costs of all of the services. And then there's also, I've alluded to this in a few ways, but maybe there's also concern about like how much does pedal people contribute to to customers maybe feeling good about the waste that they're leaving out. And there's just a bunch of photos of like lots of things that I find about like these, single-use products that are like, have these labels that are really trying to convince people that like, oh, it's fine, this is sustainable, you can recycle me and stuff like that, without challenging like the idea of single use in the first place. And so in some ways, you can think, well, is pedal people potentially doing a similar thing in some ways? When I interviewed customers a few years ago, this was something that came up a few times, where it's like, people are pretty trusting about pedal people. Like we have this very green image. And so, people were saying things like, oh yeah, I trust that they're doing good things with the waste, that they're not just like dumping it in the Hudson or something like that. Or, I trust their environmental ethic. Pedal people is a very easy step to take. And so there's a lot of potential here that pedal people could use for like education and things like that, but that's also balanced with like, being a business and in some ways like dependent on this waste that people are leaving out, even in increasing amounts of like Amazon boxes and things like that we complain about a lot of the time. But I just maybe want to end thinking about like there's a lot of potential with that community involvement. This here is on the bottom right. This is a photo that was from a display that was at the historic Northampton. They had that Making It on Main Street event in 2019, I believe, which was kind of like a 400-year history of Main Street and all these different displays in chronological order. And this last display, like the very end of this 400-year history, was like this little thing that people made about pedal people, right? So it's just kind of like a great example just to show like, hey, we've had like a major influence on this community, and it's one of the things that people think about when they think about Northampton. That even at the Historic Society, like people are like mentioning us in this way. So I've often thought of like our interaction with customers or potential for like social activism or things like that as one of these major like untapped things that maybe we don't even realize like the potential like strength that we have to do things like that. So yeah, this is my last slide. It's bringing up a few things that I have already just so we can look at them together. There's that gross income one, and also the health of the cooperative. On the left, this is something from our internal site that gives you an idea of like how big Pedal People is in a different way. These are all like individual pickups that we have in the Northampton area. Like every dot there is a pickup. So like it covers a lot of the city, and it's like extremely concentrated in lots of those areas. There are parts of the city we can't service. Actually, there's more than this, because like this map doesn't include Leeds, and it doesn't include East Hampton, which I haven't mentioned at all. Actually, that was another major expansion point also, that we now cover a good portion of East Hampton as well, which isn't covered in this map. Yeah, so by lots of metrics, just to like introduce the discussion, like I think we're still in phase 3, whether we're kind of like at a peak or whether we're still accelerating, I'm not exactly sure. I think definitely in terms of like gaining more customers, we could still do that, like as much as we want to. I think again, we're probably about to have another customer hiring freeze just because of the amount of demand. In other ways though, like, you know, there are things that we should probably consider, like the growth of the collective. Like lots of people have asked, like, should we continue to grow in general, both in terms of number of members of the collective, or and or in terms of the customer base. I think there's lots of concerns with how inflation is now affecting our members, and how like our pricing structure is not really like keeping up with that, because we haven't really had to like rapidly raise prices in this period of time. I guess most businesses haven't had to deal with that. So like, and consensus decision making is relatively slow and deliberative, and intentionally so, but like that's not great when like rents are rising faster than people's pay. Yeah, and then maybe also some of the stuff that I thought about of like, that I mentioned about like impact on customers, maybe even beyond like this, like pay, like, you know, what social impacts can we have? And like, you know, is that in some ways, or should that be more prioritized than that is now? Like, is that a metric we're not really thinking about as much, that isn't like quite as easy to put on a graph because it's not as easily quantifiable? Yeah, so maybe I'll stop there. I'm happy to hear your comments, especially if other people from Pedal People want to add anything or give different takes about anything that I've presented, or if you think I've left major things out that we should consider. So yeah, thanks. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can.
Well, maybe just leave that one up for a second.
Oh.
I'll just kind of.
Oh yeah, cool.
First of all, thank you. That was phenomenal. So one of the formats of the exercise is to identify what phase the cooperative is in, and Ethan says phase 3. So the first one is justification. It certainly seems like you're past that, at least in your main model of what seems to be recycling and trash. Then there's organizational designs. You've done a lot of that. Growth, glory, and heterogeneity. That refers to membership one and the same thing. And then there's recognition and introspection, and then of course choice of closing or tinkering or alternating on your business model. So I just wanted to say, hey, for a first discussion point, if you don't have anything directly for Ethan, that could be something we discuss. But I do want to bring it back to Ethan's presentation, especially we're so thankful to have so many Pedal People here. If you have other thoughts or challenges to what Ethan said, please go ahead.
Just want to say that was awesome. Thank you, Ethan. That was so thoughtful and a lot of information. I'm still kind of taking it in.
Thanks.
Anybody else? You don't have to.
Yeah, no, I don't want to jump ahead of anyone from Pedal People if they had more to add. But no, this was great, Ethan. I was actually excited to listen to this because I really enjoyed your dissertation when I was able to listen to that when you did a few months ago. And I wrote some notes because I wasn't fast enough to think while you were speaking. You did, because there's something I thought about from before, with like you're talking about like the single use and having people not use those as much. And you did talk a little bit about educating customers about not using as much of that. And I just was wondering, I don't even know how I want to word this, but you know, whether you think people going into more compostable single-use products is a better option, or you know, is it, I don't want to make you guys like bring up a whole new level of work, but you know, you talk about people having all their Amazon boxes. You know, is there a way to try and educate people to shop more locally? I don't know if that, I don't want to, if that takes away from your business of those boxes, but if people saw it, since you did a lot of work on the environmental impact of, you know, trash hauling and the, you know, gas powered vehicles, if this would just be another step to say, hey, don't buy from Amazon, go see if you can get something downtown Northampton or something a little bit more local.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think you've actually identified one of the central, not just tensions, but maybe even like a contradiction in pedal people. So like what you said made me think of like there've been things in the opposite direction that I presented. So like Ruthie recently shared over the email list like with a success story. So you can think about this, like how much of this is a success story or what ways, where she was talking about, oh, this one long-term customer used to be a weekly customer. They really worked on reducing their trash. They then went to a bi-weekly schedule. They then went down to monthly. And then, you know, now they produce so little trash, and we've inspired them so much that like they actually just bike the little waste that they have to the transfer station themselves. And so it's like, and it's kind of like, oh, that is like inspiring in lots of ways. We you know, gotten this person to like reduce their waste to like an extreme amount. We've inspired them to bike, like shown what they could do with hauling. Like that seems like a total success for like a lot of these core values in our mission statement. But on the other hand, like it was a long-term customer, and now we no longer have that long-term customer because like they're just bringing their trash on their own, or they're like reduced it so much. So like that's what I mean by like there's a contradiction going on there in terms of like a lot of these values, and this has to do with the issue of waste in particular. Where like, you know, if we, and it doesn't have to be like so extreme like that, but it is almost like any amount of like education and success that we have in the waste reduction part could translate into loss of income. So that's weird to say the least. In terms of like stuff that people are still going to use, it's sort of like, yeah, compostable could be better in lots of ways. And I think we have seen an increase in compostable stuff in general. I think that still is, some people critique that still as like, well, that's still like single use, like you're still using it once and throwing it out, which may be, you know, good if you're, you know, a coffee shop or something like that like, you know, needs to do like to-go stuff or something like that. Yeah, that's better than non-recyclable plastic silverware, but, you know, yeah, encouraging people to use things like, you know, reusable bags or something like that, that can be, you know, a good way to like reduce the amount of paper bags that like some people are leaving out in their recycling, again, potentially reducing overall waste amounts then. So like there's that, you know, contradiction that exists there.
Hey, Ethan, if I could pipe up.
Yeah.
There's also another inherent way that maybe we could even be promoting this more as a collective, but a way for reducing trash waste overall, which is there's a financial incentive to be recycling more as a customer for our customers, because the more we provide a certain amount of recycling waste that we can collect from our customers. And overall, if customers put more into recycling, that reduces the amount that they're putting out for trash waste. And then we have different tiers of trash waste that customers can pay for. Very often, as it happens, you'll have a typical tier is 30 gallons of trash and 60 gallons trash. Both customers have the same amount of recycling waste. However, many customers, you'll still find maybe half their trash is just potential recyclable waste that they're paying for at a higher amount that they don't necessarily have to be paying for. And some customers realize that, and so that is a way that maybe, if depending on how our publicity committees can orient kind of like the message for customers, that could be a good way down the road that we can try to incentivize more recycling versus just trash waste. There's also a lot of compost in trash as well, quite often.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the screen that I brought up on the lower right, this is kind of like supporting some of what you've said. It kind of like has a breakdown in total amounts hauled by like type of stuff, which we record, of course, so we can actually like create graphs like this. And the proportions have actually remained kind of consistent over the years. Like there's been some fluctuation, although our customers do seem to have much higher recycling rates than like the city at large with the statistics that they have. But yeah, that could be something that we push for, is like making that trash amounts, that big like brown thing at the bottom, like, we could continue to reduce that in lots of ways. Yeah, I also think though that the critique I was offering though would still like potentially criticize like recycling or compost in general, to the extent that like it's encouraging single use. Like it's still better than trash, but like it's still, depending on the object we're talking about, it's still like not as good as like reusing multiple times, for example. But yeah, that's Ben. Yeah, I think that's a great example of like lots of one of the many ways we can like actually like have a positive impact on our customers in lots of ways without affecting our bottom line. Another one also could be like stuff that's not really related to things like this, but like exploring other parts of the business, like, are there like delivery related things, for example, that we could do that would help people do more things that are like reusing or something like that, like really trying to get back more into like the like farm share delivery stuff for like things like that. Yeah.
One other funny thing is we actually a large revenue maker for us is the introduction of compost pickup. And the funny thing about compost pickup is there's a lot of customers that might be at live at houses that have a yard that where compost disposal is possible or compost pile is possible, and yet we're still picking it up, which is the same sort of like we would love, based on our mission statement, for all of our customers to be tossing their compost out in their yards and developing gardens and lack of lawns. However, it's a very good revenue source for us, so we have to balance that.
Yep.
I will say I had no idea that pedal people did more than waste pickup until just now. That's completely new to me, and it's very cool. I'm looking at this little graph you have, the materials hauled, and it looks like the 2019 to 2020 has a significantly higher increase rate. And I'm assuming that has to do with the pandemic and people being at home a lot more, and all of the like the masks that you have to use and whatnot. So the single-use items kind of increased because of the pandemic. Does that seem accurate?
It's definitely pandemic related. I don't think it was more single-use items, although, well, in my experience, lots of people did get more takeouts because restaurants were closed and they did want to actually, support those restaurants staying alive. But most of it was just that they were home more. They're like waste that they normally would have produced during the day that was dealt with by their offices, that was all at home all of a sudden. So yeah, that's also one of the reasons that we had the new customer freeze a few times in that period, because it was just like, we need to keep up with the current customers that we have already, and they're leaving out a lot more. Yeah.
Ethan, I wonder if you could, or any of you all at Pedal People, could talk more about, or could just spend a moment talking about how there's a tension within the membership about expansion and what growth is, what's sustainable, maybe what's useful or effective for people, and what kind of growth achieves your mission. And you mentioned about more delivery processes, which I think would be amazing for downtown Northampton, to just have a few less trucks or a few less cars. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on what the, advocating side for expansion or new services is, as opposed to what the people who think it's not something you should be doing or that you want to limit growth.
Well, I could give my take if no one else wants to jump in. There's an interesting general dynamic with lots of cooperatives that are as egalitarian as we are, in that, like, since we're already like distributing pretty much all the profits to the workers based on how much work one does, there's not necessarily any individual incentive to keep expanding the business, like the way we're set up. Like, I don't make more money just because we hired 2 more people and we're earning a lot more revenue. Like, this major graph like continues to go up because I'm still just getting paid for like just the work that I do. So in that sense, like, I think lots of us have talked about like, well, if we're all okay with where we are, like, why are we continuing to expand? Some people talked about, well, we want to make these jobs more available for more people. I think there's a question now of like, well, how many more people can this business support with this like population size, I guess, or maybe now even like people who can afford to live in Northampton. So that's a major thing that I think has come up. It also affects lots of dynamics, like I mentioned, with our decision-making structures. Like, I think we're still doing okay with consensus overall, but I could see a point where that's going to become difficult, especially I think because we've been doing pretty much only online meetings for a few years, which I think makes, in my experience, I think that's actually making consensus more difficult than some people realize, but that's just my take.
I agree. I think there are a lot of reasons why growth, there are way more negatives that I can think of to expanding than positives. And I think all the reasons that Ethan mentioned, and also just keeping group cohesion, like we make our decisions by consensus with 25 people, but maybe there's like a level of quality to the consensus where we're restricted in how much discussion we can have, and we're restricted in the amount of time that we spend together as a group, getting to know each other and building trust and building a sense of cohesion. So my sense, having seen our co-op grow a little bit, is that it feels harder to maintain cohesion in both relationship and in sort of like technical, practical ways. And I can't think of a lot of great reasons why we would want to expand much more, other than there's demand for it and we want to please people.
Yeah, I would probably say on the other side of benefits of expanding, I guess that Pedal People expanding the vision of what a simple machine bicycles can provide to the community is a very large one, and being able to grow that At least we're doing that, it seems like, growing through East Hampton right now, which is curious to kind of see how Northampton growth kind of happened in a new light in East Hampton. I think alternatively to a lot of the collective funding goes into our committees, and some of that can be technical growth within the collective. Ethan mentioned e-bikes earlier. That's a potential way that we can grow our collective in terms of accessibility and in other ways. There's equipment changes that we can make, and just more investment. We can invest the collective funding into more of our committees so that people can be spending time working outside of the physical nature of the job, which is a really taxing aspect. Like, I think there is a comment to be made that just we do get paid very well overall as worker owners. However, because the job is so taxing, the amount of time that we can invest in the job is severely limited compared to somebody driving a trash truck.
And it's not equally accessible to all workers because, you know, some workers may be stronger and capable of hauling more often than others, which is another challenge.
Yeah, if I can add a possible other maybe benefits to expansion, while I agree that, like, you know, on face value, there's not a lot of incentive on an individual level to see an increase in, like, say, our customer base. I think with more workers, there's probably better opportunity, or I don't know, it might be easier to find coverage for when you're unable to work, which means we can keep the business a little bit more stable. And then I also suspect that there might potentially be a break point in the future. I kind of spearheaded an application for funding to try to maybe have our own transfer center. And it's something I know that Pedal People has talked about quite a bit. And when Ethan was talking about the challenges of that we've experienced in dealing with the different transfer stations, that it's something we've talked about as a collective in the past. And I think if we can reach that point where we can open and operate our own transfer station, a lot of new opportunities will actually open up to us, and that can maybe break us out of this cycle of being the bike trash hauling company, and open us up to a lot of broader opportunities.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, I think that this maybe goes beyond the immediate aspects of that transfer station proposal. Like, we've had lots of talks of, like, you know, if people still need stuff moved around, like, you know, can we do some of these other, like, reuse things that we've been talking about? And I'm phrasing this in a weird way. People have talked about, like, instead of a transfer station, or maybe in addition to a transfer station, also having, like, a reuse center, and one that's not like the one that's run by the city, kind of on the edge of town, that is only open like a few hours each week, but, like, you know, an actual, like, you know, exchange shop or something like that. Like, if our values are to try to reduce waste, like, can we incorporate that into our business in lots of ways? So yeah, I agree that like, you know, this is another potential opening for us to, like, think about, like, how do we expand our business and, like, keep our values, like, integrated with that.
Really appreciate these thoughts on the tensions with expansion, and it's really interesting because I certainly hear you on governance concepts. With more people can mean more challenging decisions. The people already there don't necessarily benefit, although hopefully new routes and new groups, meaning the overall cooperative, is doing well, and maybe your surplus share is higher, but I imagine that would be minimal. And then taking a look at just knowing the good work you do. I used to live next to Alex and Ruthie. Was that, you know, good environmental behaviors are a good thing, and you're encouraging that. You do that for people. So that's something that, from just the outside perspective, I want to see more. I want to see every bit I can. I want half of Northampton using better people if they could. So this is really great to get different perspectives on what the growth is. I did want to move on to some other topics while we have this great group here, and just to say that there is a follow-up proposal that we will have for pedal people, just if we can engage in some of these in a constructive way, because some of them are really exciting. And for some of the new pedal people here, we do support cooperative expansions and startups. So if there's a way we can do that for some of these ideas, we really would. Something else is what I wanted to have as far as just assessing and getting a sense from people on the metrics on the health of pedal people as a cooperative. And talking about expansion is really good about this, because you're obviously not talking about having to save what you already have, but instead saying, hey, so where are we going from here? And you're in a position where you've got some space to say, hey, are there larger projects we want to research and design, like your having your own transfer center, which would be amazing. But I wondered if there's other things about your cooperative health as it is now, not thinking about the future and new goods or services you want to offer, but to say, hey, do you feel this model is going to head into the next 10 or 20 or 50 years from a place of health, or what you think are the challenges, again, considering right now without thinking you'll expand to 500 people. What are the challenges to your cooperative health that you want to have as far as financial or member participation? Also, if people want to talk more about expansion, of course, please do. I didn't mean to shut the conversation down. I just wanted to cover a couple things.
I would maybe pop in here. I think a challenge in the future is going to be pedal people looking at how we frame our service to customers. We definitely have to raise our rates in order to match inflation, which is something that we're looking at right now. But also there's a lot of talk that our trash service or hauling service for waste is also kind of a premium service. We do a lot more than a typical trash hauling company does. But framing things as premium services and tiers is kind of seems how the way a lot of marketable things are right now, and it puts it out of reach out of a lot of people, and that's an accessibility issue. And so I think that's going to be a challenge, and hopefully we can meet that by expanding kind of resources for our customers and thinking more about how we provide pricing options to our customers. Check.
I agree with those points being the biggest challenges that I foresee in our near future. Inflation and housing crisis is just very, very hard to be a wage worker in Northampton, and that just feels like it's intensifying with general like economic stratification intensifying everywhere, and that's definitely happening in Northampton. Feels like a challenge to our workers in a lot of ways. How can we keep our pay high enough to support people to be able to live in Northampton? Yeah.
Love these.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, just going off of those, like I think like both of those comments just also introduce another, maybe this is not a contradiction, but like at least like a tension between like us thinking about us as worker owners and like the customers that we serve. And I think we've often like been trying to be considerate about like not wanting to contribute to the increasing financial strain that we know that everybody is feeling, for example, so like, our raising our prices, for example, like, is that causing will that cause problems for, our customers who may also be having financial problems? So I just noticed that coming up in our decision making a lot, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. And there are ways of dealing with that, like Ben mentioned, with thinking about like expanding or maybe even more formalizing our financial assistance, or maybe even moving more towards some kind of sliding scale system, something like that. And just seeing if there's enough support for doing that. But yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there.
I have a question in regards to expansion, just in general, not necessarily specific to pedal people, but Christina had mentioned something about how like the governance of the company gets harder the more you have. I've heard of worker-owned cooperatives that have like hundreds of worker owners. So how would governance, you wouldn't be able to do like a consensus governance at that point, right? Or like, how does that work? Just out of curiosity.
I would love to just share a thought on that as far as knowing other worker cooperatives, including Rainbow Grocery out of San Francisco, which has almost 300, and Equal Exchange, which has something like 100. A lot of times there's different ways of thinking about it. And for those of us who enjoy collective governance, and collective management, there are ways to preserve that too. For example, if pedal people decided to have a transfer station and or a courier service in Northampton, you could have one cooperative that is made up of the different departments or sections, and each of those sections or departments could operate collectively, and then decisions that are in the larger co-op have to also all be approved. So Rainbow Grocery out of San Francisco, they've got like 250 or 300 people for worker members there. And each department is its own little operating body. So the cheese department makes their own thing. And I remember visiting, this was a long time ago, so please don't quote my story to anybody. But I remember visiting the cheese area, which is ironic because I don't eat any. But they said that they talked all the time, and it was pretty informal unless things were really difficult. Then they would take like something or a formal vote. And then they take that to the General Assembly meetings, and they all work it out there with their own representative. So there's ways to preserve collective management. And then just really quickly, there's also ways to modify consensus, which I bet most of you are familiar with, requiring more than one block, say 2 or 3 blocks, or having different systems where you show your support, and there's a certain amount of support you have to have before a decision is made. I just want to throw that out there that there's models, but I am curious what pedal people think about what are other ideas to preserve the great thing you have. Even at 25 people, is that too much? What do you think?
I think it has been interesting looking at how committees we structure, like Ethan was mentioning before, a lot of work in the collective and conversation happens through committees so that time is not taken up in the collective meetings. However, the committees can vary in functionality and in interest, and so that's definitely an area. I think the way that the committees are structured might be a focus on how to make the collective be more efficient as it grows larger. Check.
Yeah, I've personally seen consensus to continue to function at larger scales. You just need to keep modifying it. I think we've also done a bit of a better job onboarding people the last few years. We used to just kind of throw people into meetings and just be like, yeah, you'll figure it out eventually, basically. Like, here's basically how to, give your opinion. And now, for example, I've done like a 45-minute orientation before people have their first, full group meeting. So like they have a sense for how it's going to work, for example. Yeah, I think like most of the things I'm familiar with, which both with worker cooperatives and intentional communities and communes that I've worked with or been a part of in the past, yeah, all use a variation of some of the stuff that Adam was describing, which is, breaking things up into sort of like smaller groups that have different levels of decision making. So that could be a further expansion of Pedal People's committee structure. I have also worked for groups that have like for larger decisions that need to be made immediately, or like just coming up with like general like funneling of decisions. They have something more like a steering committee that like can make like larger decisions, or like at least like they're the ones who are kind of more controlling the agenda for like the stuff that comes up for the general meetings. There are many options, basically. I guess my concern for pedal people is, or groups in general, is just like, the group has existed for 20 years or something like that, with lots of modifications, but still like consensus as that major structure. So I do wonder if we were going to significantly alter that and not just significantly tinker with it, like if we would run into difficulty with that. Like I'm not quite sure how attached people are to consensus in the way that we're doing it. So that's a discussion to have.
I also want to bring up a really large topic, at least for our collective, that we it's a challenge potentially in the future that I think sometimes we take for granted, because we have a lot of members that have been around for a long time, but the challenge of potentially losing a core structure of worker owners in our collective that have been here for a while, and the knowledge that and the character that they bring to the collective. If one of the core few, especially Alex or Ruth, you left, that would fundamentally change our collective for sure. And I don't know how to, we on the screen right now is a screenshot from our Wikipedia for a collective, and that's kind of where we keep a lot of our info, and it's a lot of info. It's constantly growing, so it's hard to comb through, but that seems to be our response to looking back and trying to understand how for new worker owners how the collective is run, along with close ties to mentors that we're all paired with. But yeah, it is going to be interesting to see if one of our older worker owners ever do leave, how that will affect us. Check.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's one of the ways of measuring like the evolution of an organization. Like, has it moved on from its original founders? And we haven't yet. Although I'm a little less worried about that than I was a few years ago, just because Ruthie has recently been, for the last few years, has been doing this thing of splitting her time significantly between living up here in Northampton and spending large chunks of her time in Kentucky with her family. And so like she's very helpful when she's here, but she's also not here a lot of the time. So that I would like her to be here all the time, of course. But it may for that topic, it makes me feel better that like, oh yeah, this person who is core in lots of ways can go away for long periods and we're still okay. It's maybe a bit different with Alex just because of the amount of technical knowledge, especially that he has with like our computer systems. Like, and I know enough to like things running if like something breaks, but like I don't have the knowledge to like really significantly fix or rebuild a lot of the systems. And that's another thing of like, you know, we're not really hiring and nor can we afford to really pay people at like standard like tech industry rates basically to like do that work for us, even if we needed a quick fix. Well, a quick fix would not be quick, basically. It would take a lot of time. So like, and is it worth our time to like train new people? So like, I mean, yeah, so Alex is different in a different way in that sense of like an original person, which to be fair, he recognizes that's an issue. I think we just haven't found a great solution for that.
I just have a question about this. You said this is a screenshot of your Wikipedia. Is that like actual Wikipedia or is this an internal like Pedalpedia?
It's an internal Pedalpedia. Yeah. So we have a internal website that has like basically everything you need for doing pedal people work, like the customer database, the billing, but there's also a section of it that's basically our own internal Wikipedia. So yeah, I'm not sure if the screenshot's clear enough, but next to like the subcategories, you maybe can see like it says edit next to them. Like it's just like Wikipedia. Actually, it's better than Wikipedia. It's like how Wikipedia used to be when anyone could really edit it and like the changes would then actually stick and you didn't have bots or people with too much time on their hands recorrecting things. But yeah, so that's another thing, that it's supposed to be open and accessible for people. It does a similar thing as Wikipedia of like tracking the changes. You can see what was changed when, but it has the problem that Ben was talking about of just like, it's a ton of information. Like even for people who've been here a long time, like it can be hard to find what you're looking for, or even know if a particular thing exists, or especially if you're a new person, like what is this thing called that I should even be searching for? And yeah, that's another thing I think we need to figure out or work on in some way.
One other discussion that we like to try to go through this exercise is to talk about how successful you think you are according to your mission and any vision statements that you have. And I know we kind of talked about that already, but you know, your particular impact with the environment, with some of the tensions included, but also kind of keeping up some of your credibility as far as what kind of a company you are that people can trust with your choices, that you aren't just throwing things in the Hudson, which was a fascinating choice for them to use. But so I wondered if I just asked anyone on a call and also people who are in pedal people to say, hey, do you feel like you're achieving your mission? Are there parts of it you wish you did more of? Are there parts you are really proud of? Thanks for the slide change, Ethan.
I could share. I get pretty depressed about the plastic container recycling and knowing that plastic recycling is pretty ineffective and very environmentally destructive. So that feels complicated to me, but I do feel really good about encouraging people to compost. and making compost accessible to people who rent or don't have yards. I feel good about that, and I feel good about, we really are trying our best to create a work environment that's really supportive for people, and it's super flawed and imperfect, but I also feel proud about the efforts that we make to have our job just be a good place to work.
I would agree with that too. Yeah, overall, I think fairly optimistic. However, I don't think that we're necessarily reaching our mission statement when it comes to trash and waste, because ultimately we bring our trash to a transfer station where it gets hauled off, and it doesn't really affect its ultimate kind of end place. That being said, I think the work definitely is very fulfilling in terms of a worker ownership kind of relationship, which is incredibly impactful, I think, for most of us. Check.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I don't have much to add, other than maybe saying like to me, like, even in meetings where sometimes I can get frustrated about like a debate, like, taking a or discussion, taking a step back and being like, oh, we're actually like deliberating based on like these core values that are actually really important. And this is not the way a standard business would operate, nor would workers even like be part of such a discussion in most cases. And I'm also, because of my various other jobs and meetings and stuff, I'm like continually exposed to like other meetings and other organizations, and like it's just like pedal people is just like so much better than any of them. I say this at meetings a few times. It's just like, yeah, it's so different, of just like, yeah, even when you're disagreeing, like to me, like there's a lot of value in just like we are able to have this conversation and disagreement on these terms, because like in most of the businesses, like you just don't, it's just like, oh, the alternative is someone just gives you orders, like, yeah.
Those are all beautiful thoughts.
I don't want to like backtrack on a lot of stuff, and I know we've got like 2 minutes left. I don't know if I'm like in any position to really say where you guys are at on this. I mean, because I don't fully understand the whole little chart thing, but I definitely would think you guys are right there in the middle. And I don't know which one of you said something about like trying to find that stabilization before you go to growth into the next step. And I just, as a new co-op, I think that's really important. And we've been kind of facing that now. We're trying to figure out where we're at to know what we need, what direction we have to go into next. And I think that's a really good thing. And I just want to throw, I really liked what you talked about, Ethan, with, and this is something good for us to try and work with too, is introducing people to how the meetings work, because that was something I didn't get in previous co-ops I've worked at, how the meeting works and how to like use your voice and say what you want to say. And I think that that's really important. And getting information from founding members can be challenging, but I think it's an important thing to try and work on, because there's so much valuable, like, yeah, something, if someone did move on, how would you do things? I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. And I did have one other question, but because you were talking about with your pay, and I was just wondering, and this can be totally answered another time, with how you increase pay for people, how you make that decision when somebody new comes on, and how that affects people who have been there for a long time.
The question is how new people get paid?
Well, and like really, and this can totally be a total thing. We don't even have to go there because I know we're really short on time. But just when you're talking about pay equity, that's just something I've done a lot of work on in the past and research on and really passionate about. And one of the reasons I left my corporate job was because somebody new would get hired at the same rate someone who'd been there for 10 years because of the way minimum wage was affected. And I know that could affect your growth too and how much you have to pay people. So which is something that I had jotted down when you were talking about that.
Yeah. So our pay rates, there's no difference at all based on seniority. So you basically earn the same amounts for doing equal amounts of work. The variation happens in the sense that you get more efficient as you do more work, like especially the gap between when you're first starting versus say month 3 or 4. So it's sort of like your individual dollar per hour, your effective dollar per hour ends up going up because you're doing the same amount of customers in less time. And so like there's maybe a gap between like newer people and most longer term members who have become very efficient, but the longer term members aren't actually paid any more just based on having been around for a while, which creates its own dynamics also around that. It's like, should that be incentivized or rewarded in some way? That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I did just want to jump in. We really like to respect people's time, and one of the ways we do that is try to start within 5 minutes of on time and end on time. I have another couple of minutes, so I'm not just going to shut the meeting down. But I did want to say before people start going that one of the processes we're going to have is have a follow-up proposal for pedal people where we can say, hey, well, first of all, thank you so much. And also, hey, here's some ideas that came out of this. Thank you, James. Is there a way that we could share some of the ideas on the table, take maybe 2 or even just one of them, and support you with resources to research what that would look like a little bit more to see if it's something you would want to pursue. So if anyone here is interested in being part of the follow-up discussion more than when they would come back after some discussion, just let me know. I did also want to say, hey, if there's anyone who has any other thoughts, we will try to wrap up in a few minutes, but are there any other thoughts that people want to share while the group is here? It's hard for me to say this through a virtual meeting at 8:30 on a weekday, but I am so grateful to Ethan and everyone at Pedal People for taking time to do this. This was a phenomenal presentation and a wonderful discussion. We learned a lot about your business. We learned a lot about the things you're doing. And, I think the only regret I have is that we didn't spend more time talking about how you got to where you got with the good things you've done. Ethan, you did a great job covering it. 20 years is tough to cover. But I'm just so thankful for this. And to at least Ethan and Christina, I'll be sending just a few thoughts that were notes to see if anything has traction for you or seems useful to you. We would love to support you more directly. That's what VAWC gets excited to do. So any other closing thoughts as we sign off? This group is too easy. So, hey, extra special thanks again. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I think next month, February, what is it, 24th or something, we'll have a board meeting, which are from 5 to 6:30. We're going to try to do collective copies unless we decide to do that in March, but we'll let you know. Thanks again, everyone, especially to Pedal People for showing up. Hope you have a great night.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.
Just kick me off. I'm just saving this so I don't lose my work again.
Okay, yeah, I got to do video stuff. So, all right, talk to you soon.